I grew up in the northern edge of Vermont, in a small house on Ashwood Road, a stretch of cracked pavement lined with skeletal maple trees and fields that always seemed to swallow the horizon. The winters were long there. The cold pressed against your chest until every breath felt like it could break you. My father worked long shifts at the paper mill in St. Johnsbury, and my mother kept to herself in a quiet way that was both peaceful and strange. We had no basement, or at least, that is what I thought for the first 12 years of my life. There was a door at the far end of the hallway near my bedroom. It was painted the same dull cream as the walls, and had no handle, just a round steel plate with 4 screws. My parents never mentioned it, and I never asked. Children are good at ignoring the inexplicable when they grow up surrounded by it. One night in early December, when the snow was piled high against the windows and the wind rattled the siding, I woke to the sound of something moving beneath the floor. It was not the groan of old wood or the rush of pipes. It was rhythmic, heavy, like someone dragging their feet in slow, deliberate circles. I sat up in bed and stared at the ceiling, trying to convince myself I was imagining it. The sound stopped. Then, a single thump, low and hollow, directly under my bed. I barely slept after that the next morning. Over breakfast, I asked my father if we had a crawl space under the house. He looked at me longer than the question deserved, then shook his head and told me not to worry about it. His voice was calm, but his eyes stayed on me too long, as if he was deciding whether I had seen something I should not have. That afternoon, my mother left for the grocery store. My father was still at work. I walked to the end of the hallway and stood in front of the cream-colored door. The steel plate was colder than the air around it. The screws were worn down, as though someone had turned them countless times. I pressed my ear to the door. For a moment, there was nothing but the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Then I heard it, faint, muffled, the sound of breathing. I jerked back so hard, I hit the wall. My heart slammed against my ribs. I told myself, it was the wind moving through the house. I told myself anything that would let me walk away, but something in that breath was too slow, too steady, to belong to a storm. That night, the dragging footsteps returned. This time, they moved in a straight line, pacing back and forth under my floor. I pulled the blankets over my head until the air was hot and stale, and prayed for sleep. The following days blurred together in a kind of anxious haze. I avoided the door, avoided looking at that part of the hallway at all. But whatever was beneath the house was not avoiding me. One evening, I was sitting in the living room while my mother chopped carrots in the kitchen. The sound began again, not from beneath my bedroom this time, but from beneath the couch where I sat. The vibration traveled up through the floorboards into my bones. My mother kept chopping, unbothered, as if she did not hear it at all. When I looked down, I saw a sliver of darkness between the floorboards shift, as though something was pressing against them from below. I could not stop staring. Then, I saw it, a pale fingertip pushing up through the gap. I froze, my legs heavy against the couch cushions. The fingertip stayed there, unmoving, pale against the shadow below, the nail chipped and rimmed with dark dirt. My throat felt tight, my mouth bone dry. I blinked, and it slipped back into the darkness. The sound beneath the floor faded, replaced by a strange quiet that was somehow worse. My mother scraped the knife across the cutting board, the rhythm steady and careless, as if she had not noticed anything unusual. I wanted to ask her. I wanted to say, there is someone under the house, but the memory of my father's stare at breakfast held me in place. That night I waited until my parents' bedroom door closed. The cold air in the hallway bit at my skin as I crept toward the cream-colored door. My hands trembled as I pressed my ear against the steel plate again. Silence. I held my breath, straining to hear, until the faintest whisper slid through the barrier. Eli. My name, drawn out, almost sung. I stumbled back, my shoulder hitting the wall. The voice was soft, but the way it curled through the metal made my skin crawl. The next day at school, I could barely focus. Words on the blackboard swam in front of me. My friends' conversations sounded far away. I kept hearing my name in that same drawn-out tone until I could not tell if it was memory or imagination. By the time I got home, my chest felt tight. My mother was upstairs folding laundry. My father would not be home for hours. I grabbed a flathead screwdriver from the kitchen drawer. The steel plate on the door had 4 screws, their slots worn thin, but I managed to turn one. The first squealed like it was screaming against being freed. The second came loose more easily. By the third screw, my hands were sweating. When the last screw dropped into my palm, the plate swung away to reveal a small, round keyhole. No handle, just a keyhole in the center of the door. I had never seen my parents with any key that might fit. Something shifted on the other side, a slow, dragging sound like knees shuffling across concrete. I knelt down, my eye level with the hole. A pale eye stared back at me. I fell backward, the screwdriver clattering against the floor. The eye did not blink. It was wide, glassy, with an iris so light it almost vanished into the white. Then the whisper came again, close enough that it felt like it brushed against my ear. "Eli, let me out." I scrambled to my feet, my pulse pounding so hard it hurt. My first thought was to run to the front door, but the moment I turned, the hallway seemed longer than I remembered, stretched like something in a bad dream. I shut my eyes, counted to 3, and opened them again. The hallway was back to normal. That night, I dreamt I was lying on the floor beside that door, my cheek pressed to the cold wood. The breathing on the other side matched mine, as if we were sharing lungs. When I woke, my ear ached, as if someone had pressed it hard against me while I slept. The steel plate was back in place, and there were fresh screws. The sight of those fresh screws sent a shiver down my spine. They were different, thicker, cleaner, silver instead of rusted brass. My father must have replaced them while I was asleep. That meant he knew I had tried to open the door. All day at school, I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see him standing there, watching me the way he had at breakfast that morning after I first asked about the space beneath the floor. But when I got home, he was quiet. Too quiet. We ate dinner in silence, except for the scrape of forks on plates. My mother kept her eyes down. My father kept his on me. I could feel the weight of them even when I did not look up. That night, I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling. I had almost convinced myself to get up and try the door again when the sound began, louder than before, directly under my bed. This time it was not footsteps. It was a slow scratching, like nails dragging across wood. I gripped the blankets, frozen. The scratching grew faster, more frantic, until it turned into pounding. The boards under my bed trembled with each hit. Then came the voice, clearer than I had ever heard it. "Eli, I am so cold." It was not a whisper anymore. It was pleading. Something inside me, maybe fear, maybe something darker, made me climb out of bed. I pressed my ear to the floor. I could hear breathing so close, it felt like it was inside my head. "Please, just a little, just enough to see the light." The pounding stopped. A faint knock came from the hallway. 3 slow taps. I crept toward the sound, my feet barely making a noise on the wood. The cream-colored door was different now. The steel plate was gone. The screws were gone. The keyhole yawned black. I crouched down and peered inside. It was no longer darkness that met my eye. It was a staircase, narrow and steep, leading down into a space lit by a single bulb swaying from a wire. The walls looked like wet stone, and on the bottom step stood a figure. She was tall and thin, her skin almost gray, her hair hanging in wet strands that stuck to her face. Her eyes were pale like glass marbles, and her mouth was too wide, as if the corners had been torn open. "Eli," she said, but her mouth did not move. The voice came from inside my head. I stumbled back and hit the wall. The door swung inward without a sound. Cold air rolled out, smelling of earth and rust. She began to climb, her bare feet leaving dark prints on the steps. I tried to run, but my legs would not move. My muscles locked as if someone had reached inside me and taken control. When she reached the top, she leaned so close I could see the fine cracks in her skin. Her breath smelled like damp soil. "Do you want to see what is underneath?" Her hand shot out and grabbed my wrist. Her skin was iced. In the next moment I was no longer in my hallway. I was standing in a low stone room. The ceiling dripped with water. In the corner, something moved, small, hunched, breathing fast. It turned toward me. It was my own face. It stared at me in the dim light, its breathing ragged and shallow. Its eyes were mine, but too bright, almost feverish. Its lips trembled, and when it spoke, the voice was thin and childlike. Yet it was speaking words I remembered saying years ago. "I am not supposed to be here." The sound of dripping water echoed off the stone walls. The tall woman stood behind me now, her breath cold against my neck. "This one was left too long in the dark," she said, without speaking, her words crawling through my mind like insects. "You should have come sooner." The thing, with my face tilted its head, as if listening to something I could not hear. Then it smiled, wide, too wide, and I saw that the inside of its mouth was filled with thin, gray worms writhing over each other. I stumbled backward into the woman, but her hands gripped my shoulders and held me still. "Do you see, Eli?" She said it as though she was showing me something precious. From the shadows, more figures emerged. Their bodies were twisted, their skin pale and damp. Some crawled on all fours, their heads twitching with every movement. Others swayed in place like broken marionettes. None of them blinked. They all had my eyes. A slow panic began to build inside me, pressing against my ribs until it hurt to breathe. My voice came out cracked. "What is this place?" The woman's long fingers brushed against my jaw. "This is what your house keeps for you. This is what grows when you feed it without knowing." I did not understand. My thoughts came in broken fragments, scattered by the steady drip of water and the weight of her stare. She leaned closer, her pale hair brushing my cheek. "You have been feeding us since you were born." The others moved closer, circling. Their mouths opened and closed in silence, their eyes fixed on me. The one with my face began to crawl toward me on its elbows, dragging its legs like they were useless. My pulse roared in my ears. I twisted out of the woman's grip and ran toward the staircase, but when I reached it, the steps were gone. In their place was a solid wall of stone, slick with moisture. Behind me, something touched my ankle. I kicked hard, breaking free, but the stone beneath my feet felt softer than it should have, almost like wet clay. My shoes began to sink into it. The woman's voice slid into my mind again. "You will stay long enough for us to know you." I screamed for help, the sound bouncing uselessly off the walls. My feet sank deeper. Hands cold and thin pushed up through the floor around me, gripping my calves. I thrashed, pulling away, but more hands joined them. The woman stepped forward, her mouth stretched open, far too wide, her jaw creaking, and then, without warning, all the figures froze. The hands released me. The stone floor went still. A sound cut through the silence, heavy footsteps from above. From the world I had left behind. Someone was coming down. The footsteps grew louder, slow and deliberate, the sound of boots pressing against wood. Every figure in the room remained still, their eyes tilted toward the ceiling as if waiting for something. The woman's head turned sharply, her neck bending too far to one side, and a thin hiss slid between her teeth. From the far wall, a narrow seam appeared, and stone crumbled away in chunks. Behind it, a staircase emerged, the same narrow, steep set of steps I had seen through the keyhole. At the top, a shadow leaned forward, blocking the swaying bulb's light. A man descended. He was tall, with broad shoulders, his face mostly hidden beneath the shadow of a hood pulled tight. His boots left dark water on the steps. In one hand, he held a bundle wrapped in burlap. It dripped steadily, the liquid dark against the stone floor. The woman stepped back, giving him space, her pale eyes never leaving his face. The other figures shrank toward the walls, their movements jerky and unnatural. He stopped at the bottom step and spoke my name. Eli. The voice was deep, steady, but it carried something that made my stomach twist. Familiarity. I had heard it before, in my own home. He pushed the hood back. It was my father. My knees weakened, my mind spinning with questions I could not form. He set the burlap bundle on the ground and crouched beside it. With careful, almost tender movements, he unwrapped it to reveal something small and pale, its skin wet and glistening under the light. A newborn, only it was not crying. Its eyes were open, and they were the same pale, glassy color as the woman's dot. My father looked up at her. "It is ready." She stepped forward, her bare feet soundless on the stone. She took the newborn in her long hands and pressed it to her chest. Her mouth moved, whispering words I could not hear. The other figures began to sway, their mouths opening in silent rhythm, as if joining her in whatever she was saying. I backed away, but my father's eyes snapped to mine. "Do not leave, Eli." The weight in his tone routed me to the spot. The woman turned toward me, holding the newborn. She smiled, a slow stretch of her lips that did not reach her eyes. "This one will need your breath to stay." She stepped closer, and the newborn's pale eyes locked on mine. Its chest rose and fell in shallow, rapid motions. "Breathe, Eli," she said. I shook my head, my throat tight, but my father's hand closed on my shoulder, strong and unyielding. His voice was low in my ear. "You have been doing this your whole life, without knowing. Now you will do it because you choose to." The newborn's lips parted. A thin wisp of mist escaped its mouth and curled toward me, pulling at my lungs as though it was already taking something. My chest began to ache, and with each second it became harder to resist the urge to inhale deeply, to give it what it wanted. The woman's pale eyes narrowed. "Do it now, or it will take more than you can give." I gasped. The air in the room changed instantly, colder, heavier. The newborn's chest filled, and the figures in the shadows let out a sound that was almost relief. Then the newborn smiled at me, and it had my teeth. The newborn's smile stayed fixed on me, to knowing for something that had just entered the world. The pale eyes never blinked, never looked away. My father released my shoulder and stepped back, but his gaze stayed locked on my face, as if waiting to see what I would do next. The woman cradled the child in her arms and began to hum. The sound was low, steady, and it vibrated through the stone walls. One by one, the other figures joined in, a droning hum that seemed to thrum in my bones. Slow at first, then quickening, my father's lips moved in time with the sound. The hum shifted into words, an old language I could not place. The newborn's chest swelled with each note, as though it was feeding on the sound. Its tiny fingers twitched, curling and uncurling. Then one of them pointed at me. "Bring him closer," the woman said. Two of the pale figures moved forward, their cold hands gripping my arms. I fought against them, but their grip was impossibly strong. They dragged me until I was inches from the woman and the child. The newborn's lips moved, forming words I could not believe I was hearing in my own voice. "You belong here." I felt something in my head shift, a pressure building behind my eyes. Images bled into my vision, the house above, as it had been decades ago, filled with strangers I had never met but who moved through the rooms as if they had lived there all their lives. I saw children playing in the yard, their faces blurred, their laughter too sharp. Then I saw my father, younger, standing beside the same woman who now held the newborn. She looked exactly the same, untouched by time. "You were promised, Eli." The woman's voice was inside my head now, drowning out everything else. "Your blood carries memory. Your breath carries life. The newborn reached toward me, and the second its skin touched mine, the images grew sharper, but this time they were of me. Only not the me that I knew. I was in places I had never been, speaking to people I had never met. My hands doing things I did not remember. I yanked my arm back, gasping, but my father's voice cut through the haze. This is not new, son. It is only the part of you that you have forgotten. The newborn's mouth opened, and from deep inside it came a sound, my voice screaming. My own scream, raw and desperate, echoing in this chamber. The woman pressed the child closer to her, shielding it from me. Not yet, she said. He is still holding too much of himself. The figures released me, and I stumbled backward. The humming stopped, all at once. Leaving the silence heavy and choking, my father moved toward the staircase, which had somehow reappeared behind him. He looked at me over his shoulder. It will not wait much longer, Eli. When it comes for you, you will either give yourself or it will take more than you can survive. He started up the steps, the woman following with the newborn. The other figures melted back into the shadows, their eyes vanishing one by one, until I was alone in the cold, damp, dark, and then, from somewhere deep in the stone, I heard it, the sound of breathing, slow, patient, waiting. When I woke, I was lying on my own bed upstairs. My chest was sore, as if I had been holding my breath all night. The morning light cut through the blinds, but it looked pale and thin, as if the sun itself had been drained. For a moment I told myself it had been a dream, but the damp smell clung to my clothes. My shoes, still on my feet, were streaked with mud and something darker. I stood, every muscle aching, and went to the window. The yard outside looked the same, except the grass near the old oak swayed though. There was no wind. The movement was steady, rhythmic, the same as breathing. I backed away and headed to the kitchen. The clock on the wall read 11:17, far later than I had thought. My phone sat on the counter, its screen dark. When I pressed the power button, it lit for a moment, before shutting off again. The battery had been full last night. I poured a glass of water, but when I brought it to my lips, I froze. In the faint reflection on the surface, I was not alone. A pale figure stood behind me, its head tilted slightly, watching. I spun, glass shattering on the floor. The kitchen was empty. A sound rose from beneath the house, not the hum from before, but slow, deep breaths. They echoed through the floorboards, and each one made the light bulbs sway ever so slightly. I grabbed my coat and went outside, locking the door behind me. My truck was parked at the curb, but when I reached it, I saw my own muddy footprints circling it over and over, too many times to count. I drove toward town, every glance in the rearview mirror making my heart race. Sometimes I thought I saw the newborn's pale eyes there, just for a second. Before they were gone, when I reached the diner on Main Street, I forced myself to act normal, sliding into a booth near the back. The waitress, a woman named Grace, who had known me since I was a kid, smiled faintly as she poured coffee. "Rough night, Eli?" she asked. I almost answered, but then I froze. Her voice, it was not her usual tone. It was the woman's voice from the basement. Grace's eyes were too pale. I stood so fast the coffee spilled across the table. She just watched me, her lips curling into the slow smile I had seen before. "It is already above, Eli." The breathing began again, but this time it was inside the diner, coming from every corner. The other customers turned toward me in unison, their eyes pale, their movements jerky. I backed toward the door, my pulse hammering. As I stepped into the daylight, the breathing followed, spilling into the street. Every person I passed turned to watch me. Pale eyes, slow smiles. By the time I reached my truck, I knew there was no boundary anymore. Whatever I had seen in the basement was no longer staying there. It was coming with me. I drove until the roads thinned into nothing but cracked asphalt and empty fields. The sky above felt lower than it should be, as though the clouds were pressing down on the earth. My hands gripped the wheel so tightly my knuckles ached, but it kept me grounded, kept me from drifting into the wrong kind of thoughts. I passed a gas station I did not remember, its sign hanging crooked and faded. The lot was empty except for a single pickup, the hood rusted through. The air smelled faintly of iron. I almost kept driving, but the fuel gauge was sinking toward empty. Inside, the place was silent. The shelves were bare, except for a few dusty cans. A man stood behind the counter, his back to me. "Sir," I said, my voice sounding too loud in the stillness. He turned slowly, and my stomach turned to ice. His face was wrong, not grotesque, not deformed, but too smooth, as though it had been placed there like a mask. His eyes were pale and unblinking. "Eli," he said, though his lips barely moved. I stepped back toward the door, but another figure was already blocking it, a woman in a long coat, her head tilted, smiling that same slow smile. "You cannot drive." "Far enough," she said. I lunged for the aisle, knocking over a display. Cans rolled across the floor as I pushed through the back door into the narrow alley behind the station. The air was colder there. I could hear something soft padding across the concrete behind me. When I turned, the newborn was there. Not in arms now, not swaddled standing upright. It was small, but not the size it should be. Its head nearly reached my chest. Its skin was too tight, as though it had grown too fast. The pale eyes locked on mine. "You left me," it said in my voice. The air felt thick, as if every breath I took cost me something. My vision wavered, flickering between the alley and a place of stone walls and damp air. For a second I was back in the basement, the humming starting again in my skull. I ran. The field stretched on for miles, but I could feel it keeping pace. The sound of its steps was not loud, just steady, unhurried, like it knew I would tire before it did. When I reached the truck, I slammed the door shut and twisted the key. The engine sputtered, then roared. I floored it, gravel spitting from the tires. But in the mirror, I saw something that hollowed me out. Every field I passed was lined with figures, standing perfectly still, facing the road, all pale-eyed, all smiling. By the time I reached the edge of town again, I knew it had no shape, no single form. It could wear anyone. It could be anywhere. And the worst part, I could no longer tell who had always been human and who had never been. I did not sleep for 2 days. I drove until my eyelids burned, until the horizon blurred, stopping only long enough to drink water and refill the tank. But it did not matter where I went. Every small town had them now. Sometimes just one standing in a doorway, sometimes dozens, filling the sidewalks. Always pale-eyed, always watching. On the third night, I pulled off the road into the gravel lot of an abandoned church outside Marfa, Texas. The windows were shattered, the steeple cracked. I thought maybe I could rest inside. Maybe the walls would keep the night out. But the moment I stepped through the door, I knew I had made a mistake. The air was colder than it should have been, heavy with the scent of damp earth. And under the smell was something else. Milk, sour and old. At the far end of the aisle, where the altar should have been, there was a crib. It was not old or broken. It was white, clean, rocking gently, though no wind touched it. My chest tightened. My legs moved without my permission, carrying me down the aisle. Each step brought a low humming, building in my skull, vibrating against my teeth. When I reached the crib, I looked down. It was not a baby inside. It was me, small, pale, with eyes wide open. It did not cry. It only mouthed the words I already knew. "You were promised." The voice behind me was low, human, and not human at the same time. I turned, and the woman from the basement was there, her face unchanged, her smile patient. "Your father opened the way," she said. "Your blood belongs to the other side. He carried you there once, before you could walk, and left part of you with us. We have been waiting for the rest." I backed away from her, but the pews shifted, closing off the aisle. The walls pulsed faintly, like breathing. "You have felt it all your life," she said. "The thinness of the world, the shadows that do not match the light. That is the part of you that is ours." I tried to run, but the crib was behind me again, and in it the pale version of myself sat up. Its mouth stretched wide, far wider than it should, and it exhaled. The air it released was not air at all, but a swarm of whispers. They pressed into my ears, my nose, my mouth, filling me with a cold so deep it hurt to think. When I could move again, the woman was gone, the crib was empty, but the whispers stayed, curling through my thoughts, shaping words I could not stop hearing. The promise is nearly kept. I left the church before the sun rose. The sky was the same color as bone, no stars, no moon, just a dull light pressing down. My truck started, but the engine sounded wrong, as if something was breathing through it. The roads were empty. No other cars, no signs of life, except the shapes in the fields. They stood in the same still lines, but now their heads followed me. As I passed by, my mid-afternoon, I was back in Ohio, without remembering the miles between. The house where I grew up was at the end of the road, its windows dark. The front door was unlocked. The smell hit me first, damp earth and sour milk, heavier now, choking Dot inside. Every room was bare. No furniture, no photographs, nothing but a thin layer of dirt on the floor. At the far end of the hall, the basement door stood open. The humming began before I took the first step down. It was louder than ever, drilling into my bones, shaking my vision until the edges of the world seemed to fold inward. The basement was not the basement anymore. The walls were gone, replaced by endless black stones stretching into darkness. Shapes moved at the edge of sight, too many limbs, faces that shifted when I tried to look at them. In the center of the space was the crib, and standing beside it was my father. He looked younger than I remembered, his eyes dull and pale. His mouth moved slowly. "It is time to finish what we began." I tried to speak, but no sound came. The humming wrapped around my throat. He reached into the crib and lifted the pale version of me. It was bigger now, my height, my build. Its skin stretched tight over sharp bones. Its mouth opened in a smile I knew was my own. It stepped toward me, and with each step I felt myself growing lighter, as if pieces of me were being pulled away. Memories, sensations, everything that made me separate from it. When it touched my chest, the cold was absolute. I could feel it sliding inside, filling the hollow spaces it had carved. My knees buckled. My father watched without expression. The humming stopped, and in the silence I realized it was not silence at all, but the sound of the stone breathing. I could still see the door at the top of the stairs, but it was so far now, and the path to it was narrowing, closing, as if the walls were folding over themselves. The pale version of me leaned close, its lips at my ear. The door never closes. And then I was looking through its eyes, at my own body, standing limp, my face blank, my eyes pale. Somewhere in the dark, the stone inhaled,